Red West stood beside Elvis Presley for over 2 decades, but what he finally revealed about the king of rock and roll shattered everything fans thought they knew. This was not about music or fame. This was about betrayal, desperation, and a friendship that ended in one of the most controversial exposés in entertainment history. It started in a boys' bathroom at Humes High School. 3 bullies cornered Elvis, ready to cut off his hair. Back then, having a ducktail and long sideburns made you a target. Everyone else wore crew cuts and plain clothes, but Elvis stood out. That is when Red West stepped in. He did not know this skinny kid with the loud clothes, but something made him fight off those bullies anyway. That single moment forged a bond that would last until everything fell apart. They became inseparable. Elvis was not just Red's friend. He was closer than family, closer than Red's own brothers. When Elvis needed a driver in those early days, hauling Scotty Moore, Bill Black, and DJ Fontana to gigs across the South, Red was behind the wheel. While the world watched Elvis transform into a global phenomenon, Red was there in the background, watching it all unfold from the inside. But the real test of their friendship came on August 14, 1958. 2 people died that day. Gladys Presley, Elvis's mother, passed away while Elvis was in boot camp. That same day, Red's estranged father died. The shared grief created something unbreakable between them. When Elvis got shipped to Germany for his army service, he did not want to go alone. He asked Red to come with him. Think about that. Red uprooted his entire life to be near someone who needed him. That is not an employee following a boss. That is brotherhood. Yet Red was always more than just muscle and companionship. He had a creative side that few people recognized. He wrote 11 songs for Elvis, including If Every Day Was Like Christmas. He co-wrote Separate Ways and If You Talk in Your Sleep. While protecting Elvis from physical threats, Red was also contributing to the very music that made Elvis legendary. Artists like Pat Boone, Rick Nelson, and Gary Puckett recorded his songs. Red wasn't some sidekick living off Elvis's fame. He had talent. He had value beyond the bodyguard role everyone saw. The threats against Elvis were constant and very real. Red acknowledged they were always on edge, never knowing what might happen. In the early years, there were problems. As Elvis's fame exploded, those problems intensified. What happened to John Lennon could have happened to Elvis much earlier. There were threats they kept quiet about, worried about copycats. Red was always the first to step up, the first to throw a punch if it meant keeping Elvis safe. But here's what made Red different. He was as sensitive as he was tough. That combination of fierce loyalty and genuine artistic soul made him irreplaceable. At least that's what everyone thought. On July 13, 1976, Vernon Presley fired Red West. Along with Red's cousin Sonny and another bodyguard named Dave Hebler, Red was told his services were no longer needed. After more than 20 years of friendship, after fighting for Elvis, writing for Elvis, and literally traveling to another country just to be near him, Red got a few weeks of severance pay and a cold dismissal. The official story kept changing. Vernon claimed it was about money, cutting costs from the payroll. Others said the 3 bodyguards were too heavy-handed with fans, causing injuries and lawsuits. But the truth that Red would later reveal was far darker. Elvis did not want anyone interfering with his drug use anymore. When Red roughed up a supplier, that was the final straw. Red and the others asked to speak directly to Elvis. They wanted to understand, to hear it from him. That request was denied. Elvis would not face them. After 2 decades of loyalty, of protection, of creative collaboration, and shared grief, Elvis hid behind his father's decision. The sense of betrayal cut both ways. Red felt abandoned. Elvis felt exposed. What Red did next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Angry, hurt, and desperate, he turned to the one weapon he had left, the truth. He knew things about Elvis that the world had never seen, things carefully hidden behind the image of the king of rock and roll, and he decided the world needed to know. Along with Sonny and Dave Hebler, Red approached journalist Steve Dunleavy. Together they began working on a book. Not just any book. a tell-all that would strip away the mythology and reveal the man underneath. They called it Elvis, What Happened, and what happened next would change everything. The book detailed Elvis's prescription drug addiction, his declining health, and the dangerous path he was on. But there was something Red did not know when he signed that deal. Something that would make this decision infinitely worse than he ever imagined. The book was scheduled to hit American shelves in August 1977. Red, Sonny, and Dave justified it as an intervention. They were not trying to destroy Elvis. They were trying to save him. That's the story they told themselves anyway. They had tried confronting him while they still had access. That had not worked. Now they believed putting it all in print would force Elvis to face reality. The shock would snap him out of his downward spiral. He would see what he had become, get real help, and turn things around. That was the plan. But plans rarely survive contact with reality, especially when that reality involves pride, addiction, and a man who had spent decades hiding behind carefully constructed walls. Elvis found out about the book before publication. According to biographer Peter Guralnick, he had even read portions of it. His reaction was not the awakening Red hoped for. Instead, Elvis cycled through waves of rage and shame. The man who had built an empire on his image now faced the possibility of that image crumbling in the most public way imaginable. The book exposed his prescription drug addiction, detailed incidents from his personal life, and painted a picture of decline that contradicted everything the world believed about the king. What made it worse was who was telling the story. Not tabloid journalists fishing for gossip, not distant acquaintances exaggerating for attention. These were his bodyguards, men who had been inside his home, who had seen him at his most vulnerable. Red West, the guy who had defended him from bullies in high school, was now the one throwing punches at his reputation. Elvis did not just feel betrayed. According to some accounts, he contemplated revenge. Guralnick documented that Elvis spoke about a plot to lure Red and Sonny back to Graceland under false pretenses. What would happen then? Elvis did not specify, but the implication was dark enough. Of course, he never acted on those thoughts. The fact that he had them reveals the depth of his pain. The book hit stores in the United States in July 1977. 2 weeks later, on August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was 42 years old. The timing was devastating. Red's intervention hadn't worked. The book hadn't shocked Elvis into getting help. Instead, it became the final chapter in a tragedy that was already written. And now, Red had to live with that. The book that was supposed to save Elvis's life instead became the definitive account of his death. Sales exploded, surpassing 3 million copies. Suddenly, everyone knew what Red, Sonny, and Dave had revealed. The drug use, the decline, the desperate state Elvis had been in during his final year. The book's title, Elvis, What Happened, became the question all of America was asking in the wake of his death. But was it accurate? That's where things get complicated. The Elvis History blog later described the book as only partially true. It had historical value, sure, but it was also riddled with errors. There wasn't a single footnote, no attribution, no corroboration from other sources. Some of the claims were later confirmed by other members of Elvis's inner circle. Others were disputed or outright denied. According to the blog, some allegations were lies fueled by resentment. Red, Sonny, and Dave weren't just concerned friends. They were fired employees who'd been cut off without explanation and given minimal severance. That anger seeped into the narrative. Jerry Schilling, another Memphis Mafia member, condemned the book outright. Elvis's home was the only private place he had, Schilling said. What happened there should have stayed private. Even Sonny West later admitted to Schilling that money was part of the motivation. They needed to write the book to make some money. So, which was it? A desperate attempt to save a friend, or a bitter cash grab disguised as concern? Maybe it was both. Humans are messy like that. Red could have genuinely believed he was helping while also being driven by hurt, anger, and financial need. Those motivations don't cancel each other out. They coexist, tangled and uncomfortable. What's undeniable is that the book didn't achieve what Red claimed he wanted. Elvis didn't change. Even on the last night of his life, he was more focused on protecting his image than improving his health. The revelation didn't lead to redemption. It led to a grave. And Red, he had to carry that weight. For decades after the book appeared, it haunted him. It defined him in ways his songwriting never did. He was no longer known first as the writer of If Every Day Was Like Christmas. That reckoning did not come immediately. First, Red had to face the moment every nightmare is made of. He had to find out his friend was gone. Red was on the set of Black Sheep Squadron when the news arrived. He had already shot a fight sequence that day. His character, Sergeant Andy Micklin, was locked in a scene when the stunt coordinator burst in. He had just learned that Elvis had died. Production stopped. For Red, time stopped completely. The man he had known since high school, the friend closer than his own brothers, was gone. And the book Red had written to try to save him had become an epitaph. Red told reporters he did not feel responsible for Elvis's death. He said Elvis had been close to death before, and they had found him in time. He said he knew it was coming, and that was one of the main reasons he wrote the book. He tried to stop what was going on while he was with Elvis, and that did not work. They wrote the book to put the problem right in Elvis's face, and it still did no good. Elvis had read portions of the manuscript. According to biographer Peter Guralnick, his reaction swung between anger and shame, but he did not change. The warning failed. What Red carried instead was something heavier than guilt. It was regret. Years later, long after the headlines faded, Red ran into another member of the Memphis Mafia on a golf course in Memphis. The friendship between them had been destroyed by the book. On the course, Red asked if they could talk privately. He wanted to apologize. He told the man he hated the damned book and wished he had never had anything to do with it. Since the day it came out, it had been nothing but a nightmare. That admission did not erase what happened, but it revealed the cost. Red had spent decades living with a decision he could not undo. The book made him infamous, not famous. It overshadowed his songwriting. He was the man who exposed Elvis. Eventually, some members of the Memphis Mafia accepted Red back. Joe, Jerry, Richard, Charlie. They believed Elvis would have eventually forgiven him too. Elvis had always been complicated about loyalty. He could hold grudges and let them go in the same breath. But we will never know for sure. What we do know is that Red spent the rest of his life building something new. He became a full-time actor, embracing acting as a new life. He appeared in Roadhouse opposite Patrick Swayze, and he landed a lead role in the indie film Goodbye Solo, where critic Roger Ebert said Red's face was a map of hard living. He wasn't playing himself, but he might as well have been. Every line, every scar, every shadow told the story of a man who had lived through something most people couldn't imagine. Red's cousin Sonny died in May 2017. Red followed less than 2 months later, on July 18, 2017. He was 81. His funeral was held at Memorial Park Cemetery in Memphis, the same city where it all began, where he'd defended a kid with a ducktail and loud clothes in a high school bathroom, where they'd driven together to southern cities in beat-up cars, chasing a dream neither of them fully understood yet, where they'd built a friendship that lasted decades and ended in heartbreak. When Sonny was told about Elvis's death during an interview the day after it happened, he broke down crying. All of a sudden, the past year of doing the book and everything they'd talked about seeing Elvis do was gone. He would remember Elvis as a very loving and very good person who was turned around by drugs. He was good and shy and warm, Sonny said. That's the way I'll always remember him. Red probably felt the same. Beneath the controversy and the betrayal and the bitter public fallout, there was still that kid from Hume's high school. The one who needed protection. The one who became a legend. The one who never escaped the spotlight long enough to save himself. Red's legacy is tangled. He was the protector who couldn't protect. The friend who spoke out and lost everything. The songwriter who wrote a tell-all instead of another Christmas song. He was loyal and he was a traitor. He was right and he was wrong. He saved no one and he told the truth. Those contradictions don't resolve cleanly. They weren't supposed to. Because the story of Red West and Elvis Presley isn't a story about heroes or villains. It's a story about two men who grew up together, built something extraordinary, and watched it collapse under the weight of fame, addiction, and impossible choices. Red spent 40 years carrying that weight. And in the end, maybe that was his real burden. Not that he betrayed Elvis, but that he loved him enough to try saving him. And it still wasn't enough. Red West's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes love looks like betrayal. Sometimes protection feels like abandonment. And sometimes the hardest thing about losing someone isn't that they're gone, but knowing you tried everything and it still wasn't enough to save them.